Ladies and gentlemen, Nuffield Scholars, it's great to finally be here and talk about my subject, Achieving Excellence in University and College Farms, Implementing Best Practice from Home and Abroad, or what I've sensibly decided to shorten to What is a University Farm for today. I think before I start, I would like to thank the Nuffield Farming Scholarship Trust and the John Oldacre Foundation for funding this study. It was relevant. You know, I had just started at Newcastle University, so the project had some real impact for us. And I'll talk about that as I go through. But most of all, I'd like to thank my wife, who has had to put up with me being away and do everything at home while I have gone off and studied. Thinking about why I picked this subject. Well, I've already said I'd started at Newcastle University as a farms director, but I've been the governor of 2 agricultural colleges. I've been involved in the management of another agricultural college, and they all had the same issues around investment, finance, and how best to deliver teaching and research. So I thought someone must be doing it right. And I guess also at the back of my mind, I was a little bit frustrated. I had a thought that universities and college farms could perhaps play the old experimental farm role and help deliver some change in UK ag. My travels took me to those countries I focused on the countries that had higher productivity than the UK, but also a different funding and structure in their models for research and teaching. And I've spoken to farm managers and politicians and academics. And politicians, I've given presentations on what I've done at Newcastle on my travels, and I've also ended up in a 2-day workshop in Germany discussing the project. All very interesting. And as I go through, I'm going to try and show you how, or pull out bits and pieces that we've implemented back at Newcastle, so you can see how the project has sort of developed in real time. So what is a university farm for? And I think that's the sort of fundamental question of the study. And when I say university, I also mean college, so I haven't forgotten it. I just don't want you to think I'm being a snob here. And I have to say there's no definitive answer. I certainly haven't found a definitive answer. Secretary Karen Ross from the California Ag Department, pictured there, probably gave the clearest answer, that it was teaching where it was attached to a university. But she very quickly added, it's also important for research for farmers. Very clear. It came clear from my travels that those institutions that didn't know what the farm was for were the ones that weren't performing as well as they should have done, whether there was a disconnect with teaching, whether there was a disconnect with research. That certainly came the plan. And so how did we deliver that at Newcastle? Well, we simply came up with a plan. We put together a 3-5-year rolling plan, and we went out to consultation with the academics and stakeholders with the university. So they knew what we were doing, we knew what they wanted to do, so we could actually try and make sure that we gave them what they needed. I don't know if it was reassuring or worrying, and you probably got that from why I've taken on this study, but all the challenges that I was facing at Newcastle was the same as everyone else's. Reassuringly worrying, perhaps. But the solutions and systems varied. But what became apparent is that there was an evolution, a constant change. Research programs developed, funding, teaching changes. And those businesses or those institutions that had moved their farm and carried on adapting had really been the ones that showed success. I think it's worthwhile at the moment just to show that, these farms are different. I, as a Newcastle University Farms Director, can't behave in the same way as my neighbour or you perhaps at home. I have committees and stakeholders and lots of other people to answer. And to put that in perspective, if you take the sort of 3 agricultural universities in the UK that don't just have farms, but they do other things, with an average turnover of 500 million and a farm turnover of 2 million, that's less than 1% of turnover. Not quite de minimis, but you can see how those farms get lost, and you constantly have to refresh and remind people who you are and what you're doing. Probably the most important thing to overcome these challenges I've seen is advocacy. And that can't be done by the farm manager. The farm manager is there for reputation and delivering on the ground. But every good and successful farm and university had a good advocate. They probably didn't know they were doing it, but they were certainly there to defend the farm and have its back at challenging times. People, as we've heard earlier, are key to success. I've visited some farms where there was high turnover of staff, and farms they were demotivated and fed up with the systems they had to follow, with the pressures put upon them. They couldn't move the business on. They were waiting for the next research project or the next project to come up, and that's sad. If you take that as in stark contrast to Hugh McClymont, who I'm sure some of you will know, who's been at SRUC for 40 years before retiring this year or last year, I think. But he knew who his stakeholders were and what he had to deliver for them, and he built up a good reputation. I think he probably had a thick skin as well, but he was certainly knew what he had to do and where he had to go, and putting those right people in place is key. In terms of helpful systems, this is one we actually put in place from my travels around. On a visit to Harper Adams, I had to complete an online sign-in sheet, an online form. And I went back to Newcastle and said, I want one. And not only did I want one, but I also wanted to add value to it. So the one that we have asked people to say what research project they're involved with or what facility they're using, so we can track what people are doing. The adage, if you don't measure it, you can't manage it. And so we've done that so we can divert resources and allocate investment, and we have that data behind that now. A question I'm often asked, and other people ask, is why do we have university farms? Why is it this big? And I discussed this with Peter Kemp, who was the head of School of Agriculture at Massey University, and he commissioned an independent report which showed that Massey, the farms at the university, were delivering $7.5 million, an overall impact of $28 million. And he said every time someone asked him what the value of the university, what was it for, he used to slap this report on the table and it would keep people quiet. But what they also did with that report and that value over the last 6 years, they've leveraged £10 million of investment, or $10 million rather, of investment on the farms, building 2 new parlours, new buildings, facilities, getting equipment. They've not done that just with university money, but they've done that with external partners coming in because they could see the value of it. So that report was really important for them. And how have we done that at Newcastle? Well, every year we've taken a slightly different approach, but we set out the amount of research funding we have on the farm. We set out the number of projects, the student, the accessibility. And I think when I go around and talk to other farmers, we'll start have to do more in terms of carbon and biodiversity for the sustainability targets that universities have. And that's certainly a common theme as I go round. Size and scale of the US is impressive. And Dan, pictured here, he managed the university farms, but also facilitated the teaching, and his team facilitated that. And I was really impressed how they got students involved, to the point where even the meat processing was sold on the campus. But he also advertised for positions, so students could live in subsidised accommodation and look after sheep and goats at weekends, just how the students were getting involved. In Ireland, the students were given a group of cows, and they had to manage, allocate grass and go. That links with students and teaching really, really was impressive in those institutions. That's something we haven't quite achieved yet at Newcastle, but we're certainly working towards. In terms of transparency, my trip to New Zealand, around the research and demo farms there, I was absolutely inspired by the way they were open with their data. Not only in terms of grass growth and cow productivity, but also finances and the trials data. And Andrea Dixon, pictured here, just started in her role and was probably picking my brains as much as me picking hers, was very much at the outset that whatever changes she made, openness and transparency had to be there. It was the key to building trust with their farmers. The other thing that really impressed me, and probably a lesson for us to learn, I took a picture of the notice board at the Dairy Trust Taranaki, and their science behind their demonstrations was really quite impressive. randomised field trials and the scientific team that designed it all, and that pushed the papers and published out. And that's probably something that we're not as good as we should be in the UK. We've started down this process at Newcastle, and we've made everything as open as we can. I mean, I have to say we switch off the locations of the tractors to students to avoid pranks, but we are open with all our data. And I think when I talk about next steps and the project, I think that I've implemented the changes. I've seen them at Newcastle, the ones that I like, the ones that work with us. And we've seen a big increase in research income. We've seen a big increase in teaching use. We've seen a big increase in open days and people wanting to come and see what we're doing, which is great. And I think Nuffield should take some credit for that. But also, what's very gratifying is that 2 of the people that I've visited have been back in touch to pick my brains about what I've learnt. So when they are making the changes to their farm, they're pulling out what the best practices that I've seen and then being able to implement it. I have 2 more in the pipeline, including a new farm that a university wants to set up, which is really quite interesting. However, there's more to do, and I sort of think back to how I first started. There's very little coordination with farmers, with university farms. And I think that would work maybe through the Agricultural Universities Council. I think that there's also some strategic investment required across the university farms, some sort of coordination and cooperation of research. And lastly, I think that universities and the farms should play a role in the plethora, linking together the plethora of research and demonstration of strategic and monitor farms that are there, maybe act as the hub, and that's certainly where my Nuffield studies will take me in the future. Thank you very much for listening.